We are now recording.
Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone. This is the September 17th meeting of the Envision Eugene Technical Advisory Committee. And so we'll go ahead and start our meeting. And I'd like to welcome everyone. I'm co-chair and assuming chairing the meeting this evening. John is not able to be in attendance tonight. So first thing, if we could go ahead and just do a brief ground rules for our meeting protocol on Zoom. So
Sure, I will put those up quickly. All right, I think we're all pretty used to it at this point, but just ask everyone to stay muted unless it's your turn to speak. Use your video so we can all look at each other while we're having a conversation if possible. Use the raise hand feature to get put in the queue, and Howard will call on you as you line up to speak. I'm gonna help them out with that if I need to. And then please don't use the chat or Q&A features since they give us some issues with public records and maintaining those records. And we are recording this meeting. And I think that's really all there is to go over. It looks like we don't have any attendees currently. So I don't think I need to go over how they can raise their hand because we don't have any of them right now.
okay, well, thank you very much. When we get to meet in person again, we'll have to have some protocols on how to act in person.
True.
That was a joke, but all right, we'll move on. The next item is the agenda. There is one just minor addition under item 2, where we're going to talk a little bit about the draft letter that was sent out that I prepared it with the help of Rebecca and a few others that would be presented as part of the meeting that's coming up Monday evening with the Lane County Commissioners and the council. So we're going to put that under item 2, and hopefully we won't need a lot of time for that, but I know a few people have provided a few comments. So are there any other additions or changes anybody would like to the agenda? Okay, hearing none, I guess we'll move forward and approve that. I don't think we need to do anything formal. So next 2 items we'll do separately, but the first one is the approval of the meeting minutes from the July 16th meeting. Does anyone have any changes, corrections, comments to that? Don't see any. If not, entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve.
Rick moves. Is there a second, please?
I'll second.
Okay, second. All in favor, just raise your hand.
I wasn't there, so I'm going to abstain.
Okay, abstain.
So.
Okay. All right. So Elena, do you have that?
I didn't catch Alexis.
Say again?
I didn't catch Alexis.
Also abstaining because I wasn't there.
Okay. Okay. All right. Any opposed? And we have 2 abstentions, Tiffany and Alexis. Okay. The next item is approval of the August 20th Zoom meeting minutes. Again, are there any corrections, changes, suggestions, additions to that? Okay, I don't see anybody raising their hand. I'd entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
I so move.
All right. And
Second.
Can we,
okay.
sorry, Lisa is actually in the attendees and I'm gonna move her over into the conversation.
Okay. Okay. So again, if there's no comments or corrections? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, if you would raise your hand in favor. All opposed? Any abstentions?
I'm abstaining. I meant to abstain from this one, not the July one. Sorry.
Okay, we'll make that correction. Okay,
You
Elena,
know
do
what? I'm the same way. I'm in the same boat. I didn't realize that we were doing two.
Yeah,
We went back to the July one because we had technical difficulties linking you guys to the July meeting minutes at the last meeting. So we held off at the August meeting approving those because not everybody could access them. So that's why we're doing both sets at this meeting.
Okay, I apologize. So I'm in favor of the July
okay,
minutes. The August minutes I'm abstaining from.
okay,
So I apologize.
no
No
problem.
problem.
It's a little confusing. Elena, do you have those, all that squared away?
I think I have that squared away. Alexis is in the same boat as Tiffany.
Okay, great, thank you. Let's see, we have no members of the public attending, so we'll go ahead and skip that. And so the next thing, just moving along, is the Urban Reserve update. Rebecca, would you like to lead a discussion on that, please?
Yeah, thank you. So at the last meeting, we talked about the e-tax role in the joint elected officials work session, which is this Monday. John, who is not at this meeting, volunteered to be at that meeting and to present on the e-tax behalf if it made sense. And I was going to take that to our leadership. So how we've decided to handle it is to have John and Howard as our co-chairs be participants in the Zoom meeting. So they'll be on camera, but Sophie and I are going to be the only people presenting. Really, I mean, we even cut Terry in. Really, it's really just because, and Jennifer, you shouldn't be listening to this, but it's really just because I cannot do a short presentation, it turns out. And I have marching orders to do a 15-minute presentation so that there's plenty, since there will be 14 elected officials to hear from, and we want to have enough time to hear from them. We're trying to keep the presentation very high level. So what I'm doing is presenting all of the information except the public involvement piece, which Sophie's presenting. Lindsay Eichner, who's our county liaison, will be there to answer questions as well as a variety of other staff, including Thea, Terry, Alyssa. So we will present the e-tax recommendations, as well as the public involvement and the Planning Commission recommendations. And then we will introduce Howard and John and have them there to answer questions directed to the ETAC afterwards, just like other folks will be there to answer questions. So since the ETAC doesn't have a speaking role, and also this is similar to how I understand we've done this type of thing in the past. So since the ETAC doesn't have a speaking role, and since this is a work session, so there is no public testimony at this meeting, we invited Howard on the ETAC's behalf, very last minute, to draft a letter summarizing the work of the ETAC and the recommendation and the other motion that he made at the July meeting. So that's the letter that you got. Thank you for those of you who had a chance to look at it. I will put it up on screen now. We got, hang on 1 second. I will put it up on screen in a minute. We heard from a few of you. Here we go. So this is the memo. Does anyone, now I can't actually see all of you because I'm sharing my screen, but I'm wondering, did anyone not have a chance to review it and needs an opportunity to read through it on screen? I'm trying to expand you guys so I can see you again.
Yeah, let me just say, I attempted to try to keep this to no more than 2 pages and try to be high level and not drill down too much into details, and just try to capture the key points. So hopefully I was a little bit successful in that. In my previous career, where I had to do memos for general staff officers on some of the projects I was working on in the military, they usually required you to keep it to 1 sheet, a staff summary sheet. So anyway, I kind of stretched the boundaries on that a little bit.
Yeah, Howard, thank you. I actually wanted to turn this part of this section over to you because this letter came from you. The other piece is that Howard, on behalf of the Sustainability Commission for the UGB analysis, wrote a letter in a similar sort of organizational style for the joint elected officials at that time, where he sort of laid out the recommendation and then went into the background of the committee and the work up to this point, and then another summary of the recommendation with a little bit more background. So Mark, thank you. Mark sent some comments that were more clarification comments that it sounded like we could sort of take and clarify. And Lisa and Kevin sent some comments in that we can look at. Phil Farrington made a suggestion for replacing the word farmland in this last paragraph with class 1 and 2 soils within the study area, because it was actually more precise, regardless of how that land was being used right now, whether it was being farmed, it was still class 1 and 2 soils. So unless anybody has a problem with that, I think that's a clarifying change that would be pretty easy to make.
Yeah, I was going to say I was okay with that, but also just put in parentheses prime farmland, because some may not know what class 1 and 2 soils
right
signify.
It's a little jargony.
Yes, it is.
That's a good idea.
Rick has his hand raised.
Yeah, Rick, go ahead.
I saw everybody's comments, but I did not see any from Mark. Did I miss those somewhere?
No, Mark just sent them to me because they were relatively minor. Mark, do you want to characterize your input? Let's see if, I'm not sure if I have it here. Oh, I think this is it.
Yeah, that's it. I thought that right, that the part in red there is what I put in. And the part you see in the middle of the screen there, ETAC members provided input on data gaps, needs, and interpretation. I'm just saying that's too vague. And I'm suggesting there we need to expand on what is meant by needs and interpretation. And so that's my point there.
Okay.
I mean, it's not even clear to me as an ETAC member what is intended there.
Okay.
A similar comment down below. Oh yeah, this one I thought reflects public input received is too vague, and I was hoping we could put something more like what I wrote in there, either with the word majority or plurality. I'm not sure which applies. So those are the substantive points I made. Oh, and then a few other deletions just for clarification.
Does anyone have any comments? Oh, Ed has his hand raised.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, excuse me. I thought it was a very well-written letter and extremely accurate all the way down to the very last paragraph. And I hope I'm not being too picky, but if you go down to the thank you right there, it seems to me that it would continue to be extremely accurate if it read, as recommended to staff, the majority of ETAC respectfully requests that the Lane County on and on. It was very clear up above on the voting and everything, but right there it's, so I just like for that to be changed. Besides that, outstanding work and thank you for doing it.
Yeah, everybody okay with that? Thumbs up or whatever. Okay, I think we can add that, not a problem. Mark, on your comment about data needs and interpretation, I understand what you're saying. I was just trying to be as brief as possible without getting too much into the weeds. But I thought that we did early on did have discussions and input about as far as the information that staff had developed. I thought that we had had some discussion about some additional data that would be helpful and what the needs were priority-wise. And I think we also, I thought, provided commentary on how we interpreted some of that data. So
Okay, so
that was the extent of what I was just, was trying to explain, only in the context that we just weren't, fed a whole bunch of stuff and just sat there, that, we were, trying to provide some feedback to staff during the process.
right.
But
Well, I think
if you
the
have
only
if you have some better wording, please propose that.
I think that's what it boils down to, is a wording question, because data gaps sounds like one item in a list. The next item in the list is needs, and the third item is interpretation. When in fact, gaps, needs, and interpretation are all modifying data. So, or modify, refer to data. And so perhaps input on gaps, needs, and interpretation of data, something like that. So it's just a matter of clarity in the expression. If you interpret the way I first stated it, then the needs and interpretation are just dangling with my problem. So I thought that you might have intended that they refer to data, but it's not clear to me from the way that's worded.
Yeah, well, maybe information gaps or something like that might be better than data.
May I suggest if the rest of the committee is comfortable with Howard taking some of this wordsmithing from Mark, that we work on the exact wording offline? Are you guys comfortable with that, given the type of input we're getting here?
Sure.
General thumbs up?
Yeah.
Is anyone, okay. Okay.
So I think Rick and Sue
That's
had their hands up.
Howard, my wife just had surgery for her hip, so I'm a little bit behind on a couple of things. But the one thing, and this comes from being an old planning commissioner, that I'm always concerned about is the way that the information is received by council. And thank you, Jennifer, for being part of our team. That's really great. I'm always concerned about the reader of this, assuming that we're saying this is our 27-year land supply for urban growth development. I would love, and maybe you're going to do this verbally when you're there, but just the idea that it's an urban reserve that we might use over 27 years, not necessarily that it will be used over 27 years. And to me, that's a really important distinction, because I, particularly when I read some other comments and so on, I'm concerned that somebody says, oh, so now we're planning to grow for 27 years into all this land, and that's not what we're doing. We're just holding the land so we don't have to go through a 20-year process to expand our urban growth boundary if that's actually what we have to do at some point. So just to make sure that gets to council and to the commission. Thanks.
Okay, that's a good point.
So can you let us know, Rick, after the meeting, if there are specific places in the letter where you think it misconstrues that, if there are? And
I don't know that it misconstrues that. I don't, when I read the letter, and again, I'm sorry, but I only read it about an hour and a half, 2 hours.
That's okay.
I didn't see that laid out. I see that we talk about the 27-year option, and there's a few other places where at least it seems like it refers that. And I'm concerned about Jennifer, we don't have to worry about, but we got several other councils and commissioners. I don't want them to think that we're forecasting growth for the next 27 years on this land, because we don't know if we're going to go there or not. And I just want to make sure that that is real clear, that they can't miss that option, because I've watched them just, you'll hear somebody tell them, well, now we're planning to grow for 27 years on all this land, and that's not what we're talking about.
I can work with Rebecca and see if we can try to add a sentence or two somewhere in there just to clarify that point or make it a little clearer. And I'm sure in your presentation you'll do that too, Rebecca.
I try.
Okay. See, I have Sue, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I look at this as if somebody's looking at it who's not on the committee. So I'm trying to view it as, how would it look to somebody who's not deeply involved in this? And I think it's a good letter, and I think it summarizes things really well. It's complicated because there's, every sentence has something in it that means something to some of us, but doesn't mean something to a lot of other people. And yet, somehow, I think it pulled together a lot of essential elements in a way that is understandable. And if somebody looks at this and wants to pursue it further, there's a way to kind of get at those points. So I thought it was very good. And like Kevin, being an old teacher, I look at the last sentence and there's, a misspelling. So I noticed that right away. But otherwise, I'm supportive. I think it's very good. And I also think that all of your other comments are very relevant and important. And I appreciate the fact that people are commenting on it.
Thank you. Alexis?
Yeah, I second that. This is an excellent letter, great work. Rick's comment inspired me to think about the framing of this a little bit. And I think it's important to include a note about this being a 50-year, like the urban growth boundaries should have 20 years. Urban reserves are for 20 to 50 years. It's not really spelled out here. And for
the planning period, right? The planning period isn't in there anywhere.
Yeah, so that's my only comment.
Okay.
That's a good one. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't see any other hands up. Does anybody else have any comments? So I'll work with Rebecca tomorrow sometime, and we'll try to get this finalized and hopefully get everybody's comments and suggestions in there. If everybody's
I think
comfortable with that approach.
I see Kevin has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kevin. Let's see.
So in some ways, my suggestion here is sort of like looking at Rick's comment at 90 degrees. And it struck me, and it interestingly, Alexis's comment about kind of the 50 years is that we've, and maybe I have a misinterpretation of our findings, but it seemed to me that we're near reaching the limits of our ability to grow area. You know, we've got I-5, we've got Junction City, we've got the South Hill boundary. So we're reaching natural boundaries without encroaching on additional good soils. And I think it'd be useful for our elected decision makers to be aware of that this isn't just some sort of, you know, we sort of said, well, we'll do 27 years instead of 30 years to save these pieces of class 1 and 2 land. But if we had to go, you know, and grow elsewhere, we can always do that. And we're arriving at the point where we won't be able to do that. And I think it would just be useful. And this letter may not be the place to do that, I acknowledge. But I think our elected officials should be put on notice that we're tasked, and the staff, and we advising the staff are tasked to look out further than most people are looking. And for many of us in the room, this is beyond our lifetime, but I think it behooves us to put it on record and advise our elected officials that this is where we're getting. And again, this letter may not be the right place to do that. Maybe it's in your presentation, or maybe it's in a different form of communication later, but so.
Yep. Good point, Kevin. I see Rick's hand up.
So kind of following up a little bit on Kevin's comment, part of our process, if I'm correct, was that we also looked at the economic costs of expanding our urban growth boundary. And we selected areas that didn't fall into that because of the current information about the economics to try to do that. There's actually land to the south, over the hills, out into Russell Creek and so on, that are expandable lands if we ever got there, but it's incredibly costly. And as Alex said, we're talking out to year, whatever this is, 2070, 2060. We don't know what's going to happen way out there. So I understand, Kevin, and I appreciate that. But when I looked at your comment, and I'm sorry I didn't make this earlier, I'm not sure that the word will have to be accommodated by. I think it should be accommodated by, but we certainly have lands to the south that we could develop into if that actually had to be done. But it's going to be, at least in current economics, horribly expensive to do that for the community. But I don't want to, my suggestion would be is we don't try to tell the council, this is all there is no more, because there really is more. It just really has to do with, does this city in 2060 want to spend a fortune? Or, I don't know, maybe we're all living and we all have drones that we move around town and we don't drive cars, we don't do anything, we're just on electric things, or we just, the old Star Trek, we buzz somewhere. But I guess I'm a little concerned about suggesting that we'll have to do it. If we should do it, I agree wholeheartedly. That's what we should be doing. Thanks.
Thank you. Sue?
I'm sorry, did you call on me?
Yeah, you still had your hand up,
Okay.
did you?
So yeah, my cynicism kind of mode went off. I really appreciate Kevin's comments. And I realized that as I was reading this, I was thinking, you know, having been involved with some of these topics for the last 15 years or so, I realized how little opportunity there really is to impact the elected officials. And so there's a letter, and you know, Johnny and Howard get to go to the meeting. But in my experience, having been on the, you know, TRG and infill compatibility standards task team and all that stuff, there's really very little opportunity to actually interact with these people in a way that gives you an opportunity to convey how you really feel about this stuff. And that bothers me because all we have is this letter. You know, we have this letter. We really don't have an opportunity to dialogue with them in any meaningful way, I don't think. That really bothers me. I'm just expressing it. I I don't know that there's a good solution. I realize that time is a big, huge factor for the elected officials. They don't have all the time in the world to spend on all of these issues. But I think it's important for us to realize that we have very little opportunity for impact on them. And so when we do have an opportunity, we need to take full advantage of it.
I will let you know that your recommendation is in our agenda packet, which they received in advance. It's also written virtually the same way as this top section in a slide in the presentation. So it is not your voice and it is not the nuances, but I am doing my best to represent what I've heard from this group to those folks. And I feel like it's hopeful, at least to give a face to the committee. And Jennifer also is a face to the committee, to be there and to be available to answer questions and to show your input and your recommendation as part of the continuum of input that we've received. So we're not just showing the Planning Commission recommendations, but we're showing your recommendations, and we're also showing the public input that we received more generally. So I totally hear what you're saying, but we're also, I feel like we're trying to convey on your behalf, given the constraints and parameters we're working within.
Good. Thank you.
Plus, if you would like to, submit your own personal testimony, that is open to as well, as everybody knows. So I told Elena to give me the hook very soon so that we would have enough time to talk about growth monitoring, but I want to make sure we're at a place where folks are comfortable expressing their input. And I don't know if you want to share any more, Lisa. What I'm hoping is we get to a place where folks are comfortable with Howard hearing your input and taking that and crafting a revised letter from it. But I want to make sure we're hearing from everybody.
Thank you, Rebecca. I just thought I would surface one concern, that might be helpful in this letter. I do want to say I appreciate Howard for crafting it, and I think it's well written. I support some of the excuse me, edits suggested by Mark and Kevin and someone else. Sorry, I can't remember who. But, I know that the issue of farmland did take up a big chunk of our time in discussion. So that was my suggestion, that it should just be noted. And that's all I have to say.
Well, I've taken notes. I'm sure Rebecca has too. And so I will do my best to incorporate everybody's comments. They're all good. And definitely will work to capture all those and provide some clarification. If everyone's comfortable with that, maybe if you are, then if we can, let's go ahead and move on to the next agenda item. Is everybody okay with that?
Can we do a general?
Yeah, if you want to do a thumbs up or sideways or.
Awesome.
Okay, great. Thank you, and I appreciate everybody taking the time to look at the letter. And I've been in this long enough. I don't have any strong. I have a thick hide and no real strong sense of authorship. So I appreciate everybody's comments, and we'll do our best to try to incorporate everybody's thoughts on that. Okay, Thank you all.
Terry has her
Discussion.
hand
I'm
up.
sorry. I should have used my button to raise my hand. I just wanted to thank you guys for that conversation. I have to head out, but I think that was really helpful in helping us prepare for the meeting on Monday. We're also doing briefings with a handful of counselors and the mayor and some of the boards of commissioners. And so we have extra opportunities to discuss some of the points that have come up during ETAC meetings. And those have come up over the course of the meetings today. So just wanted to let you know that, and thank you all for your hard work, and wish you health and safety as the weather hopefully continues to improve.
Okay. All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
Gary. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to growth monitoring, the buildable lands inventory methodology, and I guess Thea is going to lead a discussion on that. Is that
Thanks,
true?
Howard.
Yep.
I will go ahead and share my screen. And Rebecca is actually going to kick us off with this. All right. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yes.
Great. Take it away, Rebecca.
So this this is really this is not meant to insult you. We did this slide and then I was like, oh good Lord, they're gonna roll their eyes at us. But the reason why we did this is because we spent so many meetings discussing the land model for urban reserves and how we designed it with the different land categories and the capacity analysis and the protected land and the committed land. And we are using all of those same words for the buildable lands inventory. And so I was afraid that it would be confusing, this transition to growth monitoring from urban reserves. This is sort of like the baton handoff. This is, we have done our work looking at these green areas on the map here. These are our suitable lands. So it isn't the full study area and it isn't an urban reserve option. It's just, this was actually from one of our public meetings. So we did the work with the land model on urban reserves. And now we are handing off this work into the trusted hands of Thea and Heather. And we're looking at the buildable lands inventory inside the UGB. And so we're shifting gears and looking back. For those of you who are on the TRG and you already did that work once, we're going back to that. To everybody else, we're shifting inward. I think that's sort of enough said on that. And it's also been a while since we went over this, this graphic with you. So I just wanted to do that one more time to talk really briefly about how these two projects were working together and how we are doing our growth monitoring on that land inside the urban growth boundary. See, I got Rick to leave. He's like, oh, good Lord, I know all this stuff. So we're collecting data, reporting results out. We're comparing our assumptions to the results that we're finding, and we're adjusting our strategies inside the urban growth boundary if needed. We're presenting these 5-year growth monitoring reports to council. And if our results, which the BLI is part of, it's one piece of the data collection process. If the results show that we're growing faster than anticipated, then we will begin the UGB analysis process. In so doing, we refine that data and that look. And we may find that we actually have enough land inside the UGB for growth, and we just go back to monitoring. Or we may find that we don't have enough land out to 2032 for more housing and jobs. And in that case, we don't just expand into urban reserves, right? At this point, we have urban reserves sitting there waiting. We don't just expand. We look inwards again, and we develop what we call efficiency measures, which are really development incentives for developing more densely inside the urban growth boundary. We look and see what we can do inside the UGB to contain more growth. If the results of that are enough, then we go back to monitoring and we see how quickly we're growing. If the results of the efficiency measures show us that we still don't have enough land to meet the needs of growth, then we consider expanding. And when we do that, as you know, we look at our urban reserves first. And we aren't expanding into all of urban reserves. We've got our little pie here. We are bringing in the amount of land that is necessary for the amount of and type of land that's needed, whether we need to expand for housing or for jobs, schools, or parks. And then that land is expanded into is creating our future urban growth boundary. So we're not starting over here, we're starting over here, so that we have this urban reserve land that's sitting here waiting if and when it's needed. Now, we've talked a lot about House Bill 2001 and how that may change things. And I really think that that comes into play here with our efficiency measures, and also later with how quickly we're growing. So it may mean that we need to expand into our urban growth boundary more slowly, or it may mean that these pie pieces are smaller because we're actually growing more densely inside our urban growth boundary. But it's too soon to know. So that piece of the puzzle will be incorporated in this project. But in the meantime, the urban reserves will be designated, hopefully, knock on wood. And I think that's the extent of my piece this evening. I think Thea gets to jump into talking about the BLI now, unless people have questions about that.
All right, doesn't look like anyone has questions.
Doesn't look like it.
And feel free to ask questions at any point while I'm talking. We're going to cover a lot of information. But as a little refresher from last week, a buildable lands inventory first determines the supply of buildable land within the urban growth boundary by classifying all land into 5 broad categories. And last week we went over what is committed for public use and what is protected for natural resources or due to natural hazards. And we're gonna do a little summary of that again. But today we're gonna be focusing on what is developed land, what is partially vacant, and what is undeveloped or vacant land. We're gonna go over the details for and the methodology behind those 3 pieces. And then just a reminder that after all of that comes the looking at capacity and how much we're assuming on what is buildable land, but we are not diving into that yet today. So we're also going to talk some about comparing back to the 2012 to 2032 buildable lands inventory, which was the most recent BLI that was run. It was done between August 2012 and May 2013, and it was adopted in January of 2018. We're gonna be calling our current buildable lands inventory run 2020X because it will be run sometime late this year or early next year. And something to keep in mind when we're talking about this, you can think of it as kind of an intermediary BLI. So we are running the full buildable lands inventory model, but this is going to be used for the monitoring report. So all of the buildable lands inventories are a snapshot in time, giving us an idea of what the available buildable land is at that one point. And so what we're doing with this run is we're updating the adopted buildable lands inventory, bringing it up to date so that we can use it for that first monitoring report to see if something was undeveloped in May of 2013. Is it now developed, or is it still undeveloped? Is it partially vacant? So we're not intending this buildable lands inventory to be adopted. It's not going to be used for UGB expansion. And if we were to run it and find out that we were developing way faster than we anticipated, then it would be rerun a separate time for UGB expansion. So we're just thinking about this in terms of it's an intermediary step, and we're going to use it to determine how fast we're developing, how densely, and where that development is happening. And then the monitoring program is going to rerun the buildable lands inventory every 5 years. And in between those model runs, we're going to be using the system to track building permits in real time. And as a little reminder, does someone have a question?
Alexis has a hand raised.
Yeah, real
Sorry.
quick. I just wanted to be very clear. You said that this is not going to be adopted, and then I also wanted to follow up and say it's also not going to be, I mean, since it's not adopted, it won't be acknowledged by DLCD, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you.
We talked a lot about, Thea and I have talked a lot about this because it's confusing, because the only time people are used to talking about the BLI is when it's in correlation with UGB analysis. And so, but we're using it in a different way. So that's an important point.
All right, so just a little review from last month. We went over what is considered to be protected land. And here's a summary of where we came out comparing whether or not it was protected in the last BLI run, whether it will be considered protected in this current BLI, whether there is a difference in the source data, and whether there's a difference in the methodology. So the big takeaway is that we're trying to remain as true to the last BLI run as possible, keep things consistent, keep the methodology the same. But there are some cases where we have to use different source data because new data are available, or more accurate or refined data are now available. So in those cases, we're going to use the new source of data, but the methodology will remain the same except for critical habitat, where we're adding in new state data. So now we're going to get into development status and talk a little bit about the input data for that. So in the last BLI, the improvement value was used from the assessor to determine whether a particular tax lot was considered developed, partially vacant, or undeveloped. And the improvement value used was $1,000. That also relied heavily on the land use layer from LCOG and the regional address layer. With this new BLI, we also are still using assessor information, that same improvement value of $1,000. But the difference comes in the fact that the land use layer that was used for the previous model run has not been updated since 2012. So we can't use that as an input in this current BLI, but instead what we're going to do is use the property class from the assessor. And this is the same thing that we did in urban reserves because we knew that the land use layer was out of date. So we used the property class and we think it worked pretty well, so that we're going to do that for the buildable lands inventory. And what the property class does is it's supposed to represent the highest and best value of the property. So if there is more than one use occurring on the property, according to the assessor, they're going to choose whichever is most intensive. So that helps us to determine what is the highest value of the property and really get at whether or not it's considered developed. We're also going to use the regional address layer, and then we're adding in the building footprint layer, which was not used last time. And that's because it was not a complete data set at that time point, but now it's being updated regularly, and we feel much more confident that it is a true representation of buildings in the area. So all those things are going to be used to help us determine whether something is developed, a particular property. Now we'll take a look at the undeveloped status. So for a tax lot to be classified as undeveloped, all of these criteria have to be met. First, it has to be not committed for public use. It has to have an improvement value of less than $1,000. It has to have an undeveloped property class code. It has to not have an address point, and it has to not have a building footprint. So this highlighted example in the image would be a classic textbook undeveloped tax lot. And moving on to if something is developed, similarly, oh, Rick?
Thea, if you could just go back for a second on property class. I'm an old assessor guy, so I use slang too. I think you said, my question gets to be, if you use the prop class, and I'm going to go to Chamber Special Use District, it shows up where those would be considered R2 or possibly a prop class of 2, and yet they have development restrictions on them because of the overlay of the zoning, the special use zoning. I'm not sure I caught how you are going to use prop class, because it would show you a multifamily classification, but yet you can't have multifamily on those lots because they have that single family overlay type stuff that they did through that zoning. And we have numerous special use districts where that has occurred. Did I miss what you were telling me there?
No, that's a great question. And if we, thankfully, we're not concerned about what type of use is occurring on that property. We're only concerned with whether it has been developed in any way. So the compatibility is not an issue for us. It would just say it has a property class code that is considered developed. And so we have a whole list of the different codes that fall into anything developed, and then a list of the codes that we consider to be undeveloped. So it wouldn't matter if it was developed with a single family dwelling, if it had multifamily, if it was considered compatible with the zone or the overlay. None of those really come into play. We just care that it boils down to what the assessor considers developed in any way, shape, or form.
So if the classification is a 7, which is multi-use, which is there's a lot of land, I believe, in Suna that has that, and it shows a 7 and it has a house on it, but because the county assessor says it's apartment land and it's worth X hundreds of thousands, and so therefore the house on it is only worth nothing, but yet the house is substantial, you're okay picking that up as being developed land?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, we're not, when we're looking at this, we're not trying to determine whether there's potential for redevelopment, just whether development has already occurred on the lot. So the redevelopment potential would come in under those efficiency measures. Okay, so for developed status,
Ed has his hand raised.
oh, sorry, I didn't see that.
Yeah, I'm just really curious about the building footprint that we're going to be using. I'm not familiar with it. Can you tell me what we're going to gain by using that?
Sure, it's a way to help us calculate the existing development that is on a lot. So it's really going to help us when we get into trying to tease out if a lot is partially vacant or if it's fully developed. But it also helps us as a status check for, you know, figuring out, well, if the lot has improvement value and it has a property class from the assessor saying it's developed and it has an address, but it doesn't have a building footprint, then that would just be a flag for us that we need to take a closer look at what's occurring there. Okay, so for a tax lot to be classified as developed, it has to meet all of the criteria, but they're just flipped for what it would be if it was undeveloped. So it can't be committed. It has to have an improvement value greater than or equal to $1,000. It has to have a developed property class code. It has to have an address point, and it has to have a building footprint. So the model will look at all of those criteria, and if it meets all of them, it will automatically classify the tax lot as developed. But then we get into the gray area where we can say, well, if a tax lot is developed, does it have additional room for development? And that's where we take a further look at all tax lots that are classified as developed to determine whether there's additional buildable land. And tax lots can be reclassified from developed to partially vacant if they meet the following criteria. So they have to meet all of the developed criteria that we just talked about, but then they also have to be greater than or equal to in size of the partially vacant threshold. So for the 2012 to 2032 BLI, this was 1 acre for most plan designations, but only half an acre for medium density residential plan designations. So if the tax lot was greater than that and had additional room for development, then it was classified as partially vacant. We do have the option moving forward of using a new threshold value of half an acre, which is allowed under the OAR listed. And that is available to use for all residential plan designations. So we're going to dig a little bit more into that and come back to you with some specific examples of what that might look like, and bring that back to the group for some additional discussion. Okay, so if a lot is classified as partially vacant, we want to figure out how much existing development is occurring on that lot. So to do that, in the previous buildable lands inventory, every single lot that classified as partially vacant was manually reviewed, and the existing development was hand calculated. And that was a lot of work, both from staff and from the TRG. So you may remember that we developed an automated process during urban reserves, and we're going to implement that similar automated process for this upcoming buildable lands inventory that should minimize the burden on staff and on the ETAC. So what the automated process does is it takes a look at all the building footprints, which are outlined there in red. and it buffers all of them 15 feet automatically. And then it generates what we call minimum bounding rectangles, which is essentially the smallest rectangle that can completely enclose both the buildings and their buffers within each tax lot. But you see here, those green rectangles have some overlaps where they're jutting out into neighboring tax lots. We want to go ahead and clean that up because we don't want to be overcounting the existing development that occurs on other lots. So the model goes ahead and removes those portions, and we're left with these yellow rectangles, which are the resulting amount of what we're saying is an estimate of existing development for each lot. So we calculate the area of those yellow polygons. And here's the example of the acres for each of those. And it's kind of difficult to see, but the takeaway is that we look at the existing development, and if it is below what we consider to be the standard deduction, which is 0.33 acres for flat lots or 0.5 acres for slope lots, then we automatically round up to that standard deduction. And if it's above the standard deduction, then we go ahead and round to the nearest 1/10 of an acre and use that as the deduction for existing development occurring on that lot.
Rick, you had a question?
Yeah, so as an example, that one that's sort of in the middle, that's the rectangle sitting sideways, I'm going to suggest from west to east. Put your...
This one?
Nope, go a little bit to your left, the next one over, that one.
Yes.
So if I understood what you said, so those two odd little triangles that are just below that land that's outside your yellow triangle, those would be considered developable lands? That's a question.
Yes, that's a good question. So we're not saying that they're developable, but we're not saying that there's currently existing development on those little triangles. So we understand that this method is not perfect and it's not going to work perfectly for every single lot. And this would be an example of, well, you know, they need a driveway to get to their house. So we know that in some cases we're going to underestimate the existing development, and in some cases we're going to overestimate the existing development. But really we just want to make sure that across the board we're doing pretty well. And so taking a look here, you can see this might be an okay example of it. But if you look to the left here, all the way at the one that's slightly cut off, that's a very small footprint of existing development for quite a large lot. So 0.1 acres, and that will get rounded up to 0.5 because it's a slope plot.
So, I mean, an amazingly incredible tool, unbelievable, from an old man looking at this thing. But is there a way to understand how much land, like in the piece we were talking about, the triangular shapes, is there a way to go through and just aggregate all those little weird pieces and say, well, it adds 12 acres, it doesn't matter. But if you add them all up and it's 300 acres, it may matter. Is there a way that your technology can sort of give us that so we can feel comfortable that it's a reasonable estimate and it's not overestimating the lands?
There's not a very easy way to go through and tell it what would be considered those tiny little triangles. You would have to hand select them. But we do want to make sure that we're on the whole, doing this properly and that we're truly accounting for what is the existing development. So if the group would like, we could come back with some additional examples of different areas around town, and we could evaluate whether the larger group thinks this methodology works, or if we need to expand the buffer around the building, or if we need to adjust the minimum bounding rectangle. But that's definitely an option. We could do that.
Well, I would just ask that if, boy, I mean, this is an incredible tool. I would ask, is there a way for us to get a feel for sort of the margin of error when we end up with these? Because I look around just this example of this little map you've got, and it just seems like there's a lot of little pieces that are sort of left that maybe really aren't developable, but we ought to understand the magnitude if we're going to try to use this tool to say, hey, it's plus or minus, you know, X acres, and what is that number? Thanks.
Okay.
And
I'd like to recognize Sue and then Ed.
Okay.
Unless you wanted to respond to that, Thea.
Oh, I would just say real quickly that that's a good point, and it's something to keep in mind. But it's also important to remember that when we're rounding up to the standard deduction, it's also larger than, in many cases, than what this yellow rectangle is. So we're not really considering these stray triangles to be developable. I don't know if that helps or not.
Okay. Well, thank you. Sue?
So I think this is incredible methodology. I'm, sort of stunned by the level of analysis that you're doing. I think it's incredible. And I'm wondering, aren't those triangles accounted for in the other parcels that they lap over onto?
Well, we are able to cut off the areas that exceed onto other tax lots. So we could determine the amount of area where it extends onto another tax lot, but unfortunately we're not able to determine the gaps, I guess, as Rick is talking about.
And so then I guess my next question, first I want to just underscore, I think this is insanely detailed work, incredible work. And, there's how anybody could argue with the level of analysis is beyond my imagination. But if you had to guess at the percentage roughly of parcels in the urban growth boundary who are impacted by this quirky little thing, would it be like 2%, 10%? You have any idea about that?
I honestly don't know off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
I do know that it depends a lot on the original shape of the tax lot.
Right.
So if we were to show you examples from an area that has been developed with straight streets and more of a grid system, these yellow rectangles would look much more uniform.
Yeah.
But when you start to get into areas that in the South Hills and with the larger lots where they're oddly shaped is when you start to see these stray triangles and cut off sections.
Okay, thank you.
Ed?
Thank you. Can you talk more about how different this is compared to the older inventory? Just to be quite honest, it appears to me that we're about to increase a lot more density within the urban growth boundary compared to the last buildable land inventory.
Sure, I'd be happy to talk about that. And that's a really good question. So what we're doing here with all of these buffers and, you know, rectangles is essentially an automated version of what happened with the last buildable lands inventory. So if a lot was large enough to classify as partially vacant, we can use the same lot right here in the middle. What staff and the TRG, I believe, did is they went through and they manually drew these in. Instead of having it automated, they went in and they took their mouse and they drug it over and, and created a new, their own version of that yellow rectangle that fully encompassed all of the existing development on the lot. And then in this case, where it would be below the standard deduction for a sloped lot of 1/2 acre, they went ahead and rounded up to the 1/2 acre and said, okay, that's the existing development for this lot. It gets the standard deduction. In the case that this happened to be much greater than a 1/2 acre, say there was another large building around the middle of the lot, they followed the exact same process. They went in and they drew a rectangle over what they considered to be the existing development. They calculated it in GIS, and then say it was 0.7 acres. And they said, well, that exceeds the standard deduction, so we're going to go ahead and deduct 0.7 acres, which is more than the standard deduction. And they did that for every lot that was partially vacant. So it's really the same methodology. We're just automating the process now, but we're going to arrive at generally the same result.
Kevin?
I concur. This is an amazing tool. A comment and a question. Comment is that maybe it'd be helpful to actually go back to the results of your earlier, of staff's earlier BLI and compare a sample area, say of the South Hills, where there's a lot of these sort of odd lots, and then just compare it to this more automated analysis and just see it's the same area, roughly the same number of rooftops. Does it correlate well? And my question would be, or I would support the idea of maybe increasing the size of the buffer. I've done a ton of site planning in my career, and 15 feet kind of as a buffer to deal with the footprint of an improvement is pretty minimal, particularly for odd size lots like this. And if you increase that buffer, it might get us closer to what will be actual practicable buildable land left over. That seemed like a reasonable way to use your tool to get a little bit closer to what might be actually buildable.
Okay.
Just a thought.
And I did want to point out, I know this is not a very large area of interest here that's shown on the slide, but the blue values do represent what was deducted as partially or as existing development in the last BLI compared to the black text, which is from this current scenario. So you'll see this lot right here. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lots where they were classified as partially vacant in the last buildable lands inventory. They all received the standard deduction of 0.5 acres for the sloped lots. And under the new methodology, or the automated methodology, they would all receive the same deduction except for this one at the top here, where the new or the automated methodology calculated the existing development at 0.61 acres. And because that exceeds the standard deduction, we would round to the nearest tenth of an acre, which would be 0.6 acres. So that would be one case where the automated version would actually have a higher existing development deduction. But we can go ahead and gather more of these examples like this and present them to the group. And we can also discuss the buffer in some more detail. Does anyone else have existing development questions? All right, we will keep going then. So now that we've gone through the straightforward examples where a lot is either undeveloped, developed, or partially vacant, there still are, or there will be, quite a few remaining properties where they have conflicting information and they don't fit neatly into any one of those buckets. So in this example here in the image, you'll see that there are some properties where they may have an address point, but they don't have a building footprint, they have no improvement value, and they have a vacant property class. So all of those lots that don't neatly fit into one classification will be manually reviewed by staff to determine why there's conflicting information and what's going on in that scenario. So in the image here on the right, that's a pretty typical example of what's going to happen if there's new development occurring. So the building permits have been approved. The lots have gone ahead and been addressed. It's put into the regional system, but there's no improvement value and the property class still shows up vacant because the actual building has not yet occurred or it hasn't been finished. It may be in progress, but we just don't see it from the aerial imagery layer because there are those time lags occurring. There are also some other scenarios where there might be a building, but no improvement value, no address. That could be a case where a building has been demolished or removed and the building footprint hasn't been updated yet. Or there may be a developed property class code, but no address or building. And sometimes this occurs when there are lots next to each other that have the same owner, and the assessor will put all of the improvement value into one lot rather than splitting it up between the two lots. So these are just some typical examples that we're aware of where there looks like there's conflicting information, but when you actually take a closer look at the property, there's a pretty simple example or explanation for what's occurring. And so we go ahead and manually assign those properties and create notes about why we made those decisions. So the next steps that we're going to go through are compiling all the BLI model inputs that we've discussed this month and last month. We're going to go ahead and refine those partially vacant threshold values, come back to you with some more information. And it sounds like from the group, we may also want to come back with some more information about existing development and the buffer values that we apply to existing development. And then once all of that is taken care of, we will actually go ahead and run the supply side of the buildable lands inventory. And that will result in having all the land classified into those 5 categories. And only then will we move on to the capacity analysis. So that wraps up our content for this week. And just wanted to let everyone know that we'd love to get your opinion on all of this information, all of the inputs, and We're hoping that we can do a straw vote on the proposed methodology for the supply side. But if people really want some more information before making that vote, that's fine too. But we'd love to have everyone share their thoughts and any questions, concerns, comments that you have about the entire supply methodology for the buildable lands inventory.
So Thea, are you asking us this evening to basically endorse the methodology? Is that what the question is?
Yes, but if you don't feel like you are ready to do so, or you would like additional information, please go ahead and state that, and we can move the, we can come back next month with more information and move the straw vote until then.
I'm not sure who raised their hand first, so I guess I'll go alphabetically. Ed?
Outstanding presentation. Thank you very much. And it has my thumbs up.
Alexis?
Thanks, Thea and Howard. Yeah, excellent presentation. I would feel more comfortable waiting until the next time. I like reviewing things just in paper in front of me. I'm not really great at following along this way. So yeah, that's my 2 cents.
Okay, thank you. Others, just to get some feedback. Kevin?
I kind of have a question. Do you see the supply methodology, the supply, as distinct and separate from capacity? So you're not asking us to weigh in on anything capacity-wise because we haven't gone over that yet. Is that correct?
That's correct. Just the supply methodology to group all of the buildable, or to group all land within the urban growth boundary into protected, committed, developed, partially vacant, or undeveloped. Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Thea, could you go ahead and stop sharing your screen? That way we can see folks. Great, thank you. So I guess what's everybody's feeling? Do you want to wait until next month after you've had a chance to review and digest this information before we, you know, get a consensus on endorsing or not endorsing the approach? Rick?
Overly impressed with the presentation after being a TRG member and going through this hand by hand. I think this is really great. I'd love to get a little bit of that input that Thea was talking about with regard to sort of the South Hills. And the reason is that when we started to do the South Hills work, we discovered that an enormous amount of our capacity ended up coming out of that South Hills stuff that I have always questioned if we could really build more housing up there. So I'm okay waiting until we kind of get a little bit of feedback from her. And I don't know that I need to wait till next month. If we get some good feedback, I'm willing to push on and say this works for me.
Okay. Thank you. Sue?
I'm ready. I think it's because of all of the work that's been done up to this point. I feel like this is a really great analysis. It's a good foundation. I have no qualms about it at all. But I'm supportive if people feel like we need to wait.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? I don't see any comments. Would somebody like to propose an approach, whether to endorse this evening or hold off until our next meeting on October 15th?
I have a question.
Yes, Lisa.
Thank you. I don't have the experience of, Sue and Rick, and to me, this seemed very thorough. And so I was wondering, if we were waiting, what would be an alternative to what Thea is putting together? I mean, this seems like state of the art. So if we waited, what would we be looking forward to comparing it to? That makes sense?
Yeah. Thea, would you like to answer that? I mean, I don't know what else, you know, if you,
Sure. So my takeaway from the group is that so far people have said that they generally feel okay about the methodology, but few people feel that the existing development methodology, they would like to see more results from it before okaying that or stamping their approval on it.
Yeah.
Is that
Mark?
generally correct?
Mark, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I do have a comment and a question. As far as all the map procedures are concerned that Thea has reviewed, I think those look fine, and I don't feel any need to go any further into understanding that, because I'm already at a point where I understand and I accept that there's going to be plus or minus 20% or some number like that on the numbers that come out, and that doesn't concern me. What one hesitation I have, though, is I'm not real clear on how this all fits with some of the larger picture. In particular, you commented earlier on the definition, I mean, on the use of the term highest and best value of property. Now, my question really is, how does that, where does that come into play, and is that part of what's under discussion now?
That's a good question. So that is assigned by the assessor, and they actually have a whole manual that goes into a great amount of detail on that. But for our purposes, we're not actually concerned with the highest or best use. We're concerned with whether there is development or whether there isn't development. Not the actual use of the development, just is there a building there? Does the building have more than or less than $1,000 of improvement value?
Okay, so the input you get from the assessor takes into account something about value, highest and best value, but that sounds like from what you just said that doesn't influence the numbers that you end up working with and the footprints that you end up working with.
That's correct.
Okay.
The state law says that you just look at, is it developed? Is it undeveloped? Is there developed with room for additional development?
Okay.
Not what type of development has occurred there.
Okay. Given that, I mean, it sounds like I'm fine with approving the procedure as it is, as you've outlined.
For the individuals that would like additional information with examples from different areas around the city of existing development, we could go ahead and put those together for you and say that there's still some wiggle room on that, but the rest of the methodology is okay if people feel comfortable with splitting it up like that.
Kevin has his hand raised there.
Since I asked about sort of the South Hills and kind of comparing the other thing, you actually answered that for me by pointing out that was the difference between the blue text and the black text. So certainly don't do that on my behalf. And I feel that what this step, I'm going to sort of feed back to you that this step is all about classifying Eugene's land into those 5 categories. And I think the methodology you've got is great to do that. I'm going to be really interested in the next step, capacity. That's where I think it'll get squishy, but this is pretty clear. So like to answer Mark's concern, the assessor's evaluation of highest and best use, it's just a on or off switch. And if the appraiser has said there's a use there, that turns the switch on. If it's vacant and there's no highest and best use, then it's vacant, or it's a negative value in her screening criteria. So I think to get to those 5 categories, and there may be some tweaking that has to happen as if you end up with 1 million little idiosyncratic things, you may find a better way to filter them out or something. So you minimize the amount of handwork needed. But I think you've done a great job. And I'm for telling Ted, the team, to move forward.
So Thea, I would assume that, if we agree out, everything looks good as far as methodology. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be some additional tweaking, if you will, or refinement as you move on and start looking at more properties and things like that. I assume that's correct, is it not?
That is correct. So we would run the model and we would come back to you with the results and review those as a group. So it's not going to be that you're signing off and we're going to go and do the entirety of the BLI. That's not the case at all. You're just saying that you approve of the methodology proposed and you're awaiting the results of that.
Alexis, I know you had a concern. I mean, how are you feeling?
Yeah, I'm after this conversation, I'm fine if we move forward today.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? So I guess I'd ask the group, for a thumbs up, down, or sideways on providing, some feedback to staff to proceed with the methodology. So if everybody could do a thumbs up or down, sideways. I can't see everybody at once. Rebecca's taking a photo, I see, to memorialize this. So is everybody's thumb up, Rebecca? You're muted, I think.
I don't know. I was busy taking my picture, so I wasn't actually paying attention. I just thought it would be a good photo op.
Oh, okay.
Thumbs up.
Oh, Elena's keeping track.
This must be getting late if you want this as a photo op.
Lisa especially looks really cool. Okay, but now I'll stop.
Yeah, I know. Lisa's got the mood lighting there, I noticed.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was very excellent, Thea. I think we're all very much impressed by what you've put together. And I think this is just probably going to be a model for a lot of other cities doing this, I would guess. So that, I think, ends our agenda today. I don't think there's anything else. Just, note that our next meeting is October 15th, and staff has asked us for a tentative hold for November 5th, and then November 19th is the November meeting. Rebecca?
And so there's a chance that we may not have information for you in October. And so that's the hold for November, as far as I understand it. It's growth monitoring, but is that still your understanding, that we were holding the November meeting, additional meeting, in case we weren't ready to come back in October?
Yes, that was my understanding as well.
Okay. So it wouldn't be an additional meeting.
Right, okay.
It would be, we'd be canceling that one. We just didn't note it on there yet.
All right. Well, take the time you need, and we'll meet accordingly. Okay. Well, does anyone have anything else? Okay. Well, everybody stay safe out there and stay healthy. Hopefully, we'll get some rain and wash away some of this pollution a little bit. And
it's raining.
Oh,
the
good.
rain has started.
It's raining.
Really?
My husband just called to tell me it's raining.
Well, I know our dog will be happy because he hasn't been able to walk for about a week and a half. So
yeah,
we're ready.
Right.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody for your time this evening, and we'll be talking soon.
Thanks, Howard.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you, Howard. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate all your hard work.